All right, everybody, welcome. It's another Summoning Hour podcast episode. And this morning and this evening, for our guest here, I am speaking with Zhenya Zerkalenkov, and he's got his own world building experience coming up. And it's great because you were actually recommended by someone I didn't know on LinkedIn, you were also related or at least friends with online with Dimitri, of another guest. So this is kind of great. I'm getting this community introduction to other people who are working in this space and in games like realm. So welcome to the show. I would love to hear more about your background and let you give yourself a chance to introduce yourself to the listeners.
Thanks for having me. It's pretty funny because I actually got to know Dimitri myself when I was starting my project on Substack. This is actually where I'm at now. I write a newsletter about world building, but my perspective, or let's call it my lens, is cultural science. So using the tools and the knowledge of a cultural scientist or maybe a cultural studies guy on for building a world or analyzing a world through the lens of a cultural scientist. And when I started the newsletter, I got in contact with world builders and fiction writers and people like that. And this is funny because this is where I discovered the newsletter of Dimitri, who you had on your podcast. I think he was the last one before me. And it's so fun because I wrote with him and he has such a similar background to mine. It's almost spooky. We were last week or 2 weeks ago talking to each other, and it's crazy because we literally speak four same languages and we studied the same academic path. So, regarding my background, I studied Sinology, which is Chinese studies. So, basically, everything about China's culture, but you have different focuses. So, in different countries and different cities. And in Germany, where I was in Munich, the focus was a lot on traditional, old, ancient China. And so I learned basically modern Chinese, traditional Chinese, and everything about philosophy, like Chinese philosophy, the good old Lao Tzu and stuff like that. And I also had to, I would say, learn about modern China as well. And again, funny, Dimitri studied the same thing. And I also am speaking Russian. I also speak German. And I also learned Chinese like him. And I also, I speak English, right? So I'm actually Ukrainian and I moved to Germany. This is how I learned German when I was at a younger age. So it's around 6 years old. And then, I learned German. I grew up in Munich. I was in university. And the fun thing is that I don't have a straight path into world building or the games industry because I work in content marketing. I work with creators and digital businesses, but I ended up there only through different paths because I was originally actually interested in the gaming or film industry. I learned when I was a teenager, I learned 3D design. I studied Blender a lot. I studied concept art. I studied drawing 2D art back when there was almost no social media and so on. So it was hard to study online, but in Germany, the niche here is not like right now it's okay, but back then it was horrible, really horrible. So I had
Oh,
to
yeah.
study online, right? And I studied Blender, I studied all of that stuff. I was interested in worlds. I was really in love. I would say from what I see right now, I'm from kind of the old generation perhaps of people because my favorite game back then was Warcraft. And it was pretty funny because I still remember the day when World of Warcraft, the first ever ad on the TV, you can't imagine how I was like sitting like that in front of my TV and it was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe. And I didn't know about that because I was like in my school and studies and somehow almost preparing for future and thinking like, just gaming and doing stuff with friends because I was kind of young. And then I saw this ad on the TV and it was awesome. Then I started playing World of Warcraft. I started kind of dabbling in all those worlds, and I was already in love with Warcraft. And World of Warcraft made me fall in love with role-playing games and especially multiplayer MMORPGs, because you have your community and you can share this fun. And this is where I actually got many friends from. And this is how I got interested in worlds, like real, cool, ancient, like worlds with a deep, I would say, history, and like worlds that feel really immersive. But at that point, I hadn't this connection between I do Blender and worlds, so I couldn't connect that at that moment. And I wasn't, perhaps I was, I've seen many people who are like, I love drawing, and yeah, but I don't know what to do with that. And maybe if you're, I know that people, for example, who live in LA or so, they're already, they know about this industry. They know they could go work as a concept artist. I heard something like that, like because the industry is there and you get exposed to that.
Yeah, that was definitely for that early 2000s time frame when concept artists had to be on location and there wasn't much of this opportunity to kind of work around. But artists now are getting commission work and they're doing a lot of things on the side, and so now they're working more that gig economy, that contract to contract kind of thing. Especially with the way the industry is right now, they're finding things and they're picking up and ending different responsibilities. But I think it's absolutely, world building being one of those things that no one really thinks about, or it usually came from the writer or the designer and the like the lead designers and stuff. And so making it approachable for other disciplines to come in and find a path to it, I think was really difficult. But now with accessibility to things like D&D, great examples like World of Warcraft, that give you that initial expression, that introduction to that idea of what it looks like and what it feels like to be in a world with other people, that has more to it than just that game. Like if you look back at the Warcraft franchise, I mean, it goes back to like the early 90s with its first game, and then how many books have spun off from it, and expansions and different storytelling lenses as well. You had the Warcrafts 1, 2, and 3, but then the expansions and even like the final act in Warcraft 3, it positioned itself to be more like World of Warcraft. But then World of Warcraft expanded on all of that. So it sounds like World of Warcraft was not just your introduction, but do you feel like it was also a good expression of what a online world could be? Because while it's not the world where it probably has the same details as a culture, like a Chinese culture that's developed for thousands of years, and it's trying to emulate something like that. Have you found other worlds that feel as expressive of that idea of a history and a culture that's building up in game that feels good?
I think for me, I mean, I know that World of Warcraft has changed, but up until today, I feel like World of Warcraft was the best, even though it's not like it could be better. I mean, it could be better, but I feel like it's still the best representation because um, they had like you don't have to pick a culture and copy paste it. You can simply reverse engineer the idea of how a culture grows. Like you don't have to take specifically Chinese or let's say, for example, Chinese or a Japanese culture. You can say like, okay, like reverse engineering. How did Chinese culture came to be? What or Japanese culture? What was it based on? They have a lot of beliefs, or European culture is also a great example. They have a lot, many gods, beliefs in terms of gods. You know, you see many games also with gods and stuff like that. But the idea is not taking gods, but something like a higher power, or how did the culture became, the geographical constraints, the constraints, and how people communicate, the how what people do and why do they do that. For example, they live near water, so they have to use water for life, or they live in the mountains, so they have to use the mountains for life. This is how culture actually evolves, and I think World of Warcraft did that pretty well. Of course, because of Warcraft, because this whole they had four races like orcs, humans, night elves, and so on, and then they created a real culture around them, and this is what it means to me. So they didn't like, I mean, they copied kind of this middle age, for example, for middle age style for humans, but night elves are perhaps a great example because a culture you have a culture that has evolved from being one with nature, for example. And how does that work? How could that look like? This is what I mean by cultural science. And this is why I think actually they did it quite well. I also like Guild Wars. I've seen that they've done it also pretty well. But I mean, many games do it quite well, but it's cultures that are so unique, like so unique that you don't even think about, can this even be a kind of reverse engineered culture from a real cultural growth? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And I think part of the difficulty with communicating that is also because this is an entertainment platform. A lot of people aren't into these types of games to understand every little detail of what a culture would understand just kind of intrinsically or how it came to be. So balancing that storytelling versus detail level believability still has to come into a balance. Is there any detail that you think maybe comes across consistently in World of Warcraft or other successful cultures, video game cultures, fictional cultures, that you think is one of those things that really helps sell it in believability without being too much of a you have to dive into the lore and understand it?
I think the thing, it's actually a very tough topic, what you say, because the bridge between the, let's say, science part or how culture actually works part to entertaining people is quite hard because usually people are too much into the, let's say, academic part or cultural science or how cultures work part, and the entertainment people, they're more into how do I entertain people. And this is the bridge that or the line that actually interests me because it's not so easy to go from one to the other. And I think there are some examples that do it quite well. For example, also Black Myth Wukong, the game, they do it pretty well with the Chinese culture. I mean, it makes sense that they've done it well. But I think real culture is not a dry archaeological type of, man, I have to study this stuff. No, I think the real culture is where it makes fun because look at real cultures, at our cultures. We go to events. We have religion, and people have fun living their religion. We have events like, I don't know, memory days of some things that happened. Like the 4th of July or stuff like that. We have celebrations, and it is fun while we remember things. So it is what I would say in our culture, the entertainment part of cultural science. So we already make it possible. We just have to think about, okay, and maybe if you look at children, like you also have to teach children how to value your culture. How, like, if you're a Spanish man or you're an Englishman or you're a Russian, how do I make my children value their culture? So you show them, oh, this is what we do when summer starts, or this is what we do when we have breakfasts or stuff like that. And this is how you teach them with fun. And this is, I would say, the entertainment side of that. So it's a hard topic, but I think in general, games do the entertainment side pretty well, without a question. I mean, people get really hooked up in games. Like they're really, the worlds are immersive. But I feel like there is still a room to implement more culture and more the idea of depth and of understanding, because if I remember when I played games like in the 2000s, even games like Counter-Strike or Battlefield, there was this let's call it problem of children gaming too much, and gaming is actually bad for children. And then there was this movement of when people started showing, but this is what I've learned from this game actually, and I was actually stoked to see when people referenced games like, I think it was Call of Duty or Battlefield, where they actually learned how to be a good team member, or how to actually help people with their health, like literally their health, right?
Right,
And
right.
stuff like that. So you can kind of combine that, but I feel like we're now more in the entertainment part and don't have enough of this learning something part. And I think we can do it. We did it already, but we're kind of going more into, I mean, I see it games, the whole layoffs and stuff like that. They're kind of more laying more into the money side of things, and that's, yeah. I'm not happy with that.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And I love the point that you're making about learning something from this, whether it's part of your culture or learning something of value from participating in this game. Something I've seen in anime recently of being like, you can get cooking lessons from this, you can get cultural lessons, you get a little bit of history from it, and it's still woven into the meaningful part of the story, but it's also something real. I think my favorite take on it right now is Delicious in Dungeon. It's like
Hmm.
fantasy themed, and they're doing cooking of the monsters in the dungeon,
Hmm. Hmm.
but they're doing mythical creatures, so you
Hmm.
wouldn't quite get anything like it, but it is translating it to stew preparation and steak preparation. And
Hmm.
while you wouldn't have the griffins or the griffin egg or anything like that, it's teaching you egg handling techniques in the kitchen. And I'm like, this is absolutely one of those touches that it's like, it's a subtle touch and it's just different enough that it engages you with the content, but like being an adult, I'm like, okay, yeah, I can see the parallel to real cooking. But if
Hmm.
I was a kid getting this introduction for the first time, being like, maybe now I have a curiosity about recreating something like this
Yeah.
in the real world, and it's like, okay, we get this parallel between storytelling and skill building. I think that that's something that could make games more relevant. And it even comes along with some of the trends I've seen from indie developers where they're making, hey, let's make this cyberpunk diorama in as the game. There's no competition, there's no unlockables. It's just, here's all the pieces, make your cool diorama and show it off. You're kind of making digital art at that point. Another game I saw was building sandcastles. You get the bucket, you get the water, and you're like scooping it up. So you're playing with the water physics, you're playing with sand, and you're building the sandcastle. And it's just kind of fun to build a sandcastle. Is it a useful skill? No, but it is useful to find a way to have fun and manipulate your environment and understand a little bit of that fun experience. And I think selling experiences is something more of going forward,
Hmm.
that generational value more from
Yeah.
younger generations, but then also because times are hard and people aren't able to go experience as many things because things
Mhm.
are expensive, because things are hard to, and there's just there's a cultural shift and a values shift that's happening right now, and it's kind of destabilizing a lot of people's take on what is available to them. And so I see all this, and it's really interesting to hear you make that point as well. I'm curious about, as you approach your own world,
Mhm.
what rules are you breaking that you're seeing that you're not prioritizing the business and you're prioritizing things like believability and accessibility to a culture through detail and world building? How's that going for you?
The first thing is because in terms of prioritizing business, the thing is, I think I'm pretty lucky because I came from the creator economy, so I understood how to monetize businesses quite early. And I also understood how to do it with fun and without extracting people's souls and stuff like that. And this is how I approach it, because I was like, okay, world building is actually pretty new for me. I had these thoughts, but again, something about my background. I had these thoughts. I didn't kind of connect that. And then I also didn't have a job. And last year I was like, I have this idea. What if what would have happened if this world would have existed, but it developed differently? And then I kind of was like, I am stressed. I want a break from job search, and let's just. I've never really written a fiction style thing, and I am a writer, but more in the content writing side, and build a world. And then I started building that world, and this is how I ended up actually where I am today, because I just started doing that and it was so interesting. And I thought, okay, let's look at the industry. Maybe I can. I mean, I have an academic background in cultural science. I see people who are architects and building worlds, going into games and going into series, and then why not cultural people who study cultures? Because like I have three cultures in my head. I understand the German culture, I understand the Russian, Ukrainian, and kind of the Slavic cultures, and I understand Chinese culture. So maybe there is this. I had the series, so maybe games or films would like to have that too, instead of just like not just but building the visual part like architects and so on. So I started looking, and then I discovered quite early that the industry is in a bad shape, and that's actually a very, very, very bad timing to go into this industry. So I was like, okay, I'm a content creator for the last 7 years. I know how to build a creator business. Why not just build my world and share it with people, and later on at some point monetize it like a creator does? Because I know how the models work. And instead of relying on an industry that perhaps I get in and then I get laid off in 2 weeks, no, thanks. So I'd rather take my time and get not laid off and have a substantial income, you know? And so this is about the business part. So I want to make myself I don't want to rely on companies that kind of their effectivity lies in laying off people. That's not what I want. So I want to focus on creating the world. So this is the business part. And the other part, in terms of breaking rules and things like that, I was pretty early on. I wasn't very happy with the whole. I like the hero's journey, but in the end, it's always the hero's journey. It's always you have a hero and you have an enemy and you have a dungeon and you have to defeat an enemy. It's cool without a question. I love this model, but if you have for the past 40 to 50 years only this kind of model, it gets boring at some point, and I got bored.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it makes sense that this model exists, because this is how we live. I come from marketing, so you have like in copywriting and marketing, you have also this common foe, common enemy system. So you see it a lot in politics, and then when copywriters write talks, for politicians, or when you see sales page, there is always this common enemy, and this is how we create a community. Like we have those fighters, they go to a dungeon and defeat this common enemy. This is why it works, but it gets boring. I mean, especially if you're in this psychology, you get bored of it. And this is where I was like thinking, okay, I mean, I understand that, but it's not really always the enemy or an outstanding enemy. Sometimes you are your own enemy, sometimes your head is your enemy. And then I came up kind of with the idea, because I'm really deep into Asian spirituality and philosophy, East Asian spirituality and philosophy. You have these yogic traditions where they talk about consciousness and consciousness evolution. And I was thinking that, yeah, we have this common enemy, and then we always have an enemy, a bad guy, and then I looked at science fiction, and we always have these tools, and it's always kind of the same idea. We grow these tools, we build these tools, then we kill the bad enemy, but then somehow there is another enemy, but why? Nobody knows why.
Oh, and they were always lurking behind, but they had no involvement previously, and so it's this constant hero's journey and escalation, and it's the same thing over and over. And I think we're seeing that kind of same um, desensitization to the same storytelling, partially because of how many superhero movies are out there, and that's been a more widespread, worldwide kind of appeal for a long time, and now everyone's kind of tired of it.
And this is actually why I was thinking like, okay, why do we have always this same scenario? I looked at science fiction, at the tools, and I was like, okay, but wait, but we actually only work on our tools and our like everything that happens outside our architecture, our tech, our tools. Why don't? And then I thought about the yogic teachings, and I was like, they work on consciousness evolution, like how people evolve their consciousness. And I was like, okay, if science fiction extrapolates science like physics and biology, why don't I just break the rules because I'm bored with the rules and pick consciousness fiction in terms of evolving our consciousness, because we always focus on the exterior, why not focusing on interior? And this idea came when I was evolving this world and working on that, and I was like, no, it's like too tech heavy. It's again this low. I don't like that, and no, I don't. I want to look at different. But when if this would have happened, then this would have happened, and let's add some kind of consciousness evolution thing on top. And this is kind of how my world started evolving, because I stripped away the rule, let's evolve tools and the exterior, and I just picked, let's evolve the interior. What would a civilization or even a world or maybe a universe look like if we didn't evolve the tools, but would evolve our consciousness? And then I was like, this is actually something that I would like to see, because some filmmakers had some they dabbled in this idea, but they didn't evolve it on a grand scale of civilization. And this is one thing. And then I stripped away the common enemy. Like we have also, when you write fiction, you always have this typical hero's journey. There is this Luke, and there is this bad dad, Darth Vader, and then he is a noob, and then he got picked up by a big badass Jedi. The Jedi teaches him, and then he comes back as a hero and not defeats, but he can't defeat, and then he comes back, learns something, and then he defeats the enemy. And I was like, it's always the same journey. What about if our like enemy would be our own evolution, like consciousness evolution? I mean, imagine our lives. This is like our worst enemy is our mind, because why can't we get rich? Because we block ourselves. Why can't we build a business? Because our mind blocks ourselves. Why can't we be friends with this? Like, for example, why can't this Russian guy can be friends with this American guy? Because he thinks he's American. I can't be friends with him. But this is a mental thing. And I thought, like, what if your thoughts and your consciousness would be the end boss, kind of, and you evolve and you grow with that, and you like what you kind of do with perhaps personal development, but on a yogic consciousness civilization style with the whole world. It's hard to imagine.
Yeah, it is hard to imagine because I think we're also used to the same storytelling mechanics and the same lessons being taught. So I'm curious, can you give an example from your world about something that you're exploring right now, and something that you feel kind of satisfies that rule breaking of growing our consciousness and putting the player on a different kind of journey?
um Yes, I think I'm almost getting there where I'm satisfied enough, but it started very it was hard actually, because I didn't have a model where like you always have this hero's journey, but I didn't have a model where I can um, look up to. So I had to study even more and remember what I learned about this whole Eastern spirituality and models. And I looked at, they have in cultural studies, they actually have kind of different models of consciousness and how it evolves and what are the next stages. If you maybe if you looked Avatar, the bending with the elements, he had this, maybe you remember the series where he was with actually a yogic teacher, and he told him about how to unlock every chakra to get your avatar status back, avatar connection back. Right, and this is exactly taken from the yogic model. So you have different stages and what you have to do in the different stages and which problems you have. You can literally, people studied Zen monks, they studied yogis, there are so many stories and books about that, and also literal academic studies. And I've digged into some of them, and I've read many books. And I took those models and was like, okay, if we had a civilization, what if we have like, let's say, for example, we have 12 levels of our consciousness. And if we live, for example, we humans, you and me, live on the third level, and a yogi would be on the sixth level. How would a civilization look if everybody was at the baseline of the fifth level and growing further? So they're not like us, they're already kind of evolved, everybody, and then they grow, and they obviously they have more knowledge, and I had to extract how or to understand how yogis, and from those stories, how they acted, and I had to kind of build a framework from that, how it could look like for a person if they evolve, and then extrapolate that on a civilization. So it was actually a very long path to do all of.
It reminds me of like the Vulcans from Star Trek. They had
Yes.
that primitive history where they were very emotionally based, and then they realized that was a problem and tearing themselves apart. And so they had to come up with a discipline to kind of lock that away or at least control it. But then it allowed their civilization to move forward and become more stabilized in that new controlled kind of situation. So there's history there, but they are also operating at a very different non-human level. So it's almost like that evolution of mindset and
Mhm.
consciousness.
Mhm. And
I can
and
wrap
I'm sorry, what was that?
I can wrap my head around that.
Yeah, but it's still actually, even though I was in the my studies actually focused on Eastern, I mean my universities, I focused it on Eastern spirituality and philosophy. It was still kind of hard for my head, and it was literally blowing my mind, so I couldn't do it for too many hours back to back, because they had to rethink things and build new models to what we actually are used to live nowadays. So this was actually a very hard part, but then I came up with a kind of a system, what I already told you, with a kind of a system where I was almost satisfied. It's how to evolve, how could things look like, and how the world would look like. So I'm pretty far in the world building process, that I've built the lore up to that point of understanding how the world would function and how the people would kind of function. So I still have a long way to go, but it's pretty much kind of there. And it was also hard to come up with new rules, because usually we have these tropes. If we think about, I mean, it's kind of fantasy sci-fi direction, but somehow different. And if we think about like more fantasy, we have these tropes of magic and things like that, the typical
British
thoughts.
actors and voiceovers that just tell you this is fantasy and this is what fantasy always is. The goblins are always goblins, the ogres are always ogres, orcs are always orcs.
Yeah. And then it's like you either have fantasy or you have sci-fi, because you have either very evolved science, but it's very technical, or you have the extremely well developed fantasy, but it's everything magic and creatures and stuff like that. And I wanted to find something in between, so where people kind of have technology, but it's more technology that isn't outwards. Because if you study yogis, they and yogic books and philosophies, they talk a lot about consciousness is your technology. So the technology is inside, but we are obviously framed and primed to think about, well, tech is something you can touch. It's a hard surface object, like this computer or something like that. It's not something inside. I thought this is a very interesting thought to approach it differently, that tech is actually our consciousness, and you have a incredible amount of stories, myths and legends, but also partly, I mean, I don't know to what extent these stories are true, but stories of, for example, Yogananda or other yogis from the 19th century, where they talked about things like dematerializing bodies and then materializing them again and making castles pop up and stuff like that. And I was like, this sounds like magic, but they turn it into a consciousness tech. And then I was like, it would be pretty cool if people wouldn't look at that as magic or as usual technology, but as something that comes from inside you. Like, for example, you take time, and you have our usual linear time. So we build a building through placing blocks on top of each other, very very basically, right? And
Right.
in their spirituality, you can, if you go the meditation and the whole consciousness and connecting with the higher consciousness route, you don't live in a linear line, you can break timelines. And if you break timelines, you can literally make the building, you can remember a time in the future, because the time gets a circle, and you can remember a time in the future where the building was already there. And I was like, this would be a very cool principle of architecture if some people on higher levels are like, yeah, this is how I build architecture. I just remember the future of that. And it's not magic. It's not technology where you assemble things or destroy them and then put them together. It's like I play simply with timelines. And this is, I also read many, not many, but a few works from PhDs of very higher philosophy and consciousness studies. And they were also writing and studying actually yogis and studying science, how time works. And they were also talking about this exact model where you can like literally just collapse time. And if you collapse time, like if you collapse this and that, then it turns to that and you have your building, right?
That's a really cool take to be able to make
Right?
that of a technology, an external technology, but just something that you can manipulate yourself. We're talking kind of crossing the layers of like the Matrix
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and themes that came from a
You were away for a second. I'm sorry. From Matrix, and what was that?
Shakespeare, just
Ah,
being
yeah,
able to have this idea that we are more than one thing. Like villains are can be humanized, and so that you're bringing all this together. So it's being able to make it that we're our own villains, but also our own heroes without being a hero's journey. And folding time on itself as an individual brings some of those high concepts that we see in sci-fi altogether,
yeah,
always about like warp technology and going faster than light. It's folding time on itself. That idea of threading timelines together or weaving them together, that is also something that's been historically explored through legend and lore. And you have like weavers of time, being that they're making the tapestry of life, the timeline itself. That is a really cool take on that idea that time also plays a factor in our individual lives, and that we could manipulate that to a level of evolution and bringing forth kind of a different world from that. And if that was something that was believed in, I could just imagine going from a culture that started at that level 5 like you were talking about, that's how they evolved. If you were to explore the prehistory of that timeline, you could see how they got to that point, or why they started there. Then as you explore the future, you get into that sci-fi realm just because they've explored the technology in themselves. That's a really fun and kind of a that's going to be a really empowering story for people to read
I
or
hope.
for people to explore. Yeah, that's
I mean,
fantastic.
just imagine, because my thought was like, imagine you have. I mean, I'm already myself very into, like, I do martial arts, like inner martial arts. This is another line of martial arts that's focused on energy, like Chi. Maybe you've heard of that. In Chinese, it's called Chi, or in the Japanese, Ki. Maybe you've heard that in some anime. And this is actually something you can work with. And I'm in that already for like 16 years. And I've worked, I've touched hands with masters that can literally move chi. And then I've read those stories of like even more evolved masters and what they do. And these are only like 5 to 10 or 20 people for our whole world and civilization. Now imagine what it would look like if a whole planet with a whole civilization would look like that, and how incredibly complex that, I mean, complex in a good way, not in a I am very confused way, but in a way like how many scenarios you would get, how many different, like real new scenarios you would get, and how many interesting things would pop up. Because I mean, for example, if you've evolved inner tech, like through consciousness evolution, and you've looked at consciousness as your tech, then maybe you have technology like we know it from sci-fi, but it would have a totally different purpose, and would look totally different. That is what I mean by reverse engineering it and like building from that. Because we also have technology, but it looks like it looks based on our approach to the world and based on what we need or what we think we need. Because, for example, we create many problems ourselves, right? And then we create tech to solve those problems, right?
Right, right, absolutely. And
And now,
when we solve that problem, we've just revealed the problem with that same thinking, and the problem that was farther beyond what that solution was. So yes, we keep trucking down and we keep improving, but it's not actually solving the problem at the end of the line. It's just getting us closer to understanding that.
yeah. And it's pretty funny because I watched, I think it was 2 years ago or so. I also explored a lot of physics, and many very, very great physicists were like, they were so great in their work that they hit the wall at some point, and they were like, when you cross a point, you go into metaphysics and spirituality, because this is like, we haven't touched this realm yet because we just can't prove it, but we can't prove it because we don't allow ourselves to accept that. But if we would allow that, we could actually examine that a much better and evolve much better. And the thing is that those people say like, yeah, so we had this problem and we have this mindset, and we try to solve this problem from within the mindset where the problem appeared, instead of going outside of this mindset. And this is how people like Albert Einstein, he's called in English, I guess, so came up with his theories, and other physicists, because they were like, why should I solve a problem from the point of where it came up?
It makes me think of a very classic artist experience, or anyone who's creative. When you're staring at a problem for so long and it's just not working, when you take time away from it and you come back to revisit it, your mind is in a different spot. You can solve a problem, you can come with a different approach because you're not as biased as the problem is. And so you come back to it. So I think you're explaining a very human response to it. But you're also allowing yourself to play with that and get away from that, where if we're dialed into it for so long, that's all we see. Being able to come from a perspective where that's not the issue, or where we're always a fresh take on it, I think that allows for that different storytelling. It's a very hero's journey antithetical to make sure that you're not just following the same patterns. I love that approach.
I mean, also thinking of this pattern, how did it happen to me? I was never in the gaming or the film industry, and people from inside the industry, they're focused on things, or their brain is focused on how the industry works, though they think in these limitations. And I come from another different, like, this is another different world, right? I was like, yeah, why not writing a story or building a world? Why not? Because I've done marketing, I've done business. Why not just building a world? And I'm not biased, and I'm not within those limitations. Maybe games, and I mean, not maybe, games and films have limitations of thinking. This is the production, this is how it has look like, and I'm outside of this whole, this is how it has to look like. And I'm like, okay, people usually think this is the hero's journey, this is how it has to look like, so that it works. And then at some point people just get lazy, because I mean, it works. Why not thinking of something different? And I really don't like that, because this is what stops us from, I mean, if you're a creative person, you're in the film and gaming industry, you're creating worlds and entertainment, you're a creative person. You don't have to be, you mustn't be the person who says, yeah, this works, so let's stay with that. That's like, no, you must be creative, innovative. And this is what happened, because I was just bored and said, yeah, I don't want to do it like that. And those people usually think, yeah, if we don't do it like that, we have a 50% chance of failing. And I'm like, yeah, I don't care about failing, because this is my own project and I monetize it on my own. So I don't care about failing. I just experiment and see what works and what I like, and find the common ground between what people like and what I like. And then we have our common ground, and then from there we create together, because you still create it for people. They must be interested in it. You just have to have this, I mean, I believe you must have this intention of really wanting to give people something, to wake up this feeling of awe inside them. I mean, why is entertainment there if not for that reason?
I couldn't agree with you more. The complacency that comes with being so business and profit focused, you see it with movies, with like all these live action remakes of Disney movies. You see it with the remasters of games, of movies, of shows. I mean, even coming back and doing, you mentioned it, the Avatar, The Last Airbender,
Yeah.
coming back and doing live action movies. And when the first one failed, come back and do another TV series. And like it's all of that. It's all of that.
Yeah.
That is the problem with not being innovative, not being risk takers. And that's it. I feel like that, like with my industry, that's where we're at. We're seeing these large studios do layoffs because they're focused on the quarterly results for their shareholders. And all these people who are getting laid off, they're finding a way, they're bootstrapping themselves, they're getting different careers. And at the end of the day, they're coming back and writing their stories, they're coming back and building their games, and they're going to get like minded people who want to do something different. And we've seen AA and AAA games showing up on Steam, showing up on GOG, showing up on itch.io, where it's all this expression that these large game studios and publishers won't touch because it's too risky. They can't guarantee it. And they're not greenlighting new projects. They are sticking with the IPs that work, sticking with the storylines that work. And eventually, it may work for now, but it is not going to keep those engines running when companies like Microsoft require 30% profitability of everything. Like, that is an astronomical number. And I'm glad that someone has that bar to set and say, we aim for excellence. Kudos to you. Profitability, I think, is the wrong bar and the
Uh,
wrong measurement. Wrong
you
measurement.
know, it actually doesn't even make sense. You know why? because if you aim for excellence, the metrics are a byproduct. Like how did Lord of the Rings perform? Like he was like, I just wanna create a badass world, like a world that's just awesome. And the metrics, I mean, you still see the metrics until today. And then Star Wars, or yeah, games like World of Warcraft, because people are thinking about great worlds in the first place. And if you think about excellence, I believe if you think and focus your intention on excellence and on really creating something, a great product in any terms, if it's a world, if it's a business, it doesn't actually make a difference, then the byproduct is always great income, a great metrics, and that the business works. So it doesn't make sense when they focus on the metrics, because they focus on fictional numbers that don't really exist, right? And how want they to focus on these numbers if they get rid of all the people that actually create those numbers? Because all those creatives, they create those worlds. So if you don't have these people, how do you want to sustain those numbers? Tell me. And that's the first thing. And I also think, I mean, it looks very bad, and I think it might be a more controversial take, but I think it's actually a good thing that happens to the industry right now, because Hollywood is going down and the gaming industry is going down, but because of their own failures and their own focus on the metrics, on the numbers, because they don't focus anymore on the worlds, on the stories, on the characters, on the creative and innovative part of the things, and maybe they can sustain it right now, but when they've fired everybody in 2 years, there will be no Microsoft, there will be no, I don't know, Blizzard or any other company that creates games. And then we have the indie projects, which will get all the attention, and they will grow into the bigger studios. But these big studios won't have any crunch. They won't have any too big focus on the numbers. They will be like, yeah, we have our idea of the world and we like it, the people like it, let's just focus on that. And I mean, we have enough money, so it grows, the company grows. Why should we actually bother? That's the thing.
The danger of asking for more.
Yeah.
Satisfied, I believe it's a term in Swedish, lagom.
Yeah.
Like, want, we want something that's just sustainable and enough. It's good. We don't your team of 20 people with some contractors that can build the world that you're looking at, that makes it sustainable for everyone to have a family, to have their health covered. Like, that's enough.
Yeah, it's enough for the viewers, for the gamers, and it's enough for the company. I mean, and if it's sustainable, it grows. I mean, it doesn't grow like crazy, but it still grows. And why should I care about growing faster if I grow already and have already enough of what I need? I have a company that works. I have a great IP or world, and I have a great team, and they earn great money. I earn great money. People are getting more and more. Why should I think even about being faster? That doesn't make sense. But I think that's the we are so into this capitalist state of mind that it's like we think about creativity because this is our number, let's call it our number, our metric, but they are used to think in numbers, and this is where it gets kind of awkward, perhaps, because they simply used about thinking growing, and they're like, yeah, but what will I do if I don't grow the numbers? Perhaps they think they lose their identity, I don't know. But and then they lose track of, yeah, if I'm excellent, I grow the numbers anyway. And it's like it's the best for everybody. Why don't you just do that?
I couldn't agree more. This has been a really wonderful conversation, Zhenya, and I'm excited to learn more about your world as you come to share it. Where can people follow you and get to know your hero's journey in writing your own world?
The best place would be perhaps on my Substack. It's called Welton Wanderer. It's a German term, something like wanderlust, but I chose it's in English. In English, it actually means world wanderer. So a wanderer between worlds, consciousness and so on. Yeah, so it's called World Wanderer on Substack, the newsletter, and this is where I share everything about the process. It's a long-term game, so it's not like I want to scale it fast for the numbers or so. It's really a project that I want to evolve slowly, substantially, and with love. So I share how I build worlds. I share how my world actually evolves, how it looks like, what ideas I have. So I really try to share the whole journey of how I create this world. And this is the place where it happens on Substack, World and Wonder newsletter.
Fantastic. I'll be sure to put a link into the show description so everyone listening, be sure to check it out and find out more about this new world coming and what we can expect from a new type of storytelling. Thank you so much for sharing your work and your perspective on so many topics. It was a fantastic conversation, and I look forward to seeing your progress along the way.
Thanks. It was a lot of fun. It was a fun conversation.